Most money advice quietly assumes you have infinite discipline, that every day you'll make the careful choice. But discipline is exactly what runs out. The alternative is a structure you decide on once. The moment income arrives, it's already divided, already moving, already working. No daily negotiation with yourself. The interesting part is why this works when willpower doesn't. Here's the thing nobody says about budgets. A budget is a promise you make to a version of yourself who doesn't exist yet. A version who will be less tired, less stressed, and less tempted than you have ever actually been at 9 o'clock on a Thursday. When that person fails to show up, we call it a discipline problem. It isn't. It's a design problem. Psychologists have a name for the pattern: decision fatigue. Every choice you make costs something, and by evening the account is empty. A plan that requires 30 small correct decisions a month is a plan that depends on you being at your best 30 times. Nobody is. So the fix isn't more resolve. It's fewer decisions. You decide the shape of your money once, you automate it, and then the structure holds even on the days you don't. Before I go further, I want to name the limit of everything I'm about to say, because it's the honest thing to do and because it applies to a lot of people watching. This works when your essential costs actually fit inside the space you leave for them. If rent alone is eating most of what you earn, no allocation system fixes that, and anyone telling you otherwise is selling something. I'll come back to that properly at the end. Keep it in mind until then. The structure itself is 4 slices. 20% to growth, 60% is a ceiling on essentials, 10% to stability, 10% to things you enjoy without justifying them. The numbers matter less than the fact that they're decided in advance. Start with the growth slice, because it's the one that has to move first. Not what's left at the end of the month. What's taken at the beginning, automatically, on the day income arrives. Why first? Because of something the arithmetic does that intuition doesn't. Take somebody who invests $500 a month from 25 to 35, then stops completely. Never adds another cent. Against somebody who starts at 35 and pays in every month until 65. The first person contributes $60,000. The second contributes $180,000, 3 times as much. At a 7% return, the first person ends up with about $700,000 at 65. The second with about $610,000. The one who paid in a third as much finishes ahead because their money had 30 extra years to compound. Now, I want to be careful here because that result depends entirely on the rate you assume. And most videos don't tell you that. At 7%, the early starter wins comfortably. At 6%, the comparison actually reverses and the late starter edges ahead. So the honest version of this lesson isn't a specific number. It's the direction. Time in the market does work that extra contributions struggle to replicate, which brings up where that 7% comes from, and it's worth being precise. You'll often hear that the broad American stock market has returned about 10% a year over the long run. That's true. Roughly 10.2% since the 1920s, including dividends. But that's the nominal figure, before inflation. After inflation, the long-run real return is closer to 7%. That distinction matters enormously in a video like this, because every number I give you is decades out. $1 40 years from now doesn't buy what $1 buys today. So I'm using 7% throughout, the real figure, which means every amount I mention is roughly in today's money. It makes the numbers less exciting. It also makes them mean something. The growth slice climbs a ladder, and the order matters more than the destination. The first rung is simple cash savings, somewhere that actually pays you. As of the middle of 2026, the leading high-yield savings accounts are paying around 4%. And that number moves with central bank policy, so check it rather than trusting me. The comparison that doesn't move is this. The average American savings account pays about 0.38%, around 4 versus around a third of 1%. Roughly 10 times for the same money doing the same nothing. The second rung is broad, low-cost index funds, owning the whole market rather than guessing at pieces of it. The third rung is the one most people skip, your own skills. A capability that raises what you can charge, compounds against every future year of income, and unlike the market, you have some influence over it. The latter keeps going past that. Property, businesses, other things. But I'd rather explain 3 rungs properly than name 7. Next slice, stability. 10% until you have 5 to 6 times your monthly essentials sitting somewhere boring and reachable. The purpose of this money isn't return. It's to make sure a bad month never forces you to sell the growth slice. Emergencies arrive at the worst possible times almost by definition. A job ends when the market is down, the car dies the same month the boiler does. Without a buffer, those events don't just cost money, they convert long-term assets into short-term cash at the worst available price. The stability fund exists so that never happens. And when you use it, refilling it comes before anything else resumes. Now the biggest slice, and the one most people get wrong, essentials capped at 60%. That's a ceiling, not a budget. And the reason it's a ceiling is that fixed costs are quietly the most dangerous thing in personal finance. Not the coffee, the 2 big ones, where you live and what you drive. They're the largest, they recur forever, and unlike discretionary spending, you can't quietly reduce them next month if things get tight. Here's how fast the ceiling fills. On $5,000 a month, 60% is $3,000. Say rent is $1,900. And that's an example, not a norm. And there's a $400 car payment. That's $2,300. About 77% of the entire essentials budget before you've bought any food. Let me make the car specific, because it's the one people underestimate most. $400 a month for 10 years is $48,000. That's not a projection or an estimate. It's multiplication. $48,000 in exchange for a vehicle that will be worth a small fraction of that by the time you finish. If that same $400 a month went into the growth slice instead, at the 7% we've been using, it would be about $69,000 after 10 years. So the real cost of the car isn't $48,000. It's $48,000 plus the $69,000 that didn't happen, minus whatever the car is still worth. I'm not saying don't own a car. In most places, that isn't a choice. I'm saying the payment is a much bigger decision than it feels like, because it's the one number on this list that quietly commits a decade of your growth slice. Fourth slice, 10% for things you enjoy, spent without justifying them to yourself. This sounds like the soft part. It isn't. It's the load-bearing part. Restriction that's too severe doesn't produce discipline. It produces a rebound. And the rebound usually costs more than the slice would have. A plan you abandon in month 3 returns nothing at all. Building in guilt-free spending isn't a reward. It's what makes the other 90% survive contact with a real life. So that's the structure. But I promise to come back to the limit, and it's the most important thing here. This system assumes your essentials fit inside 60%. For a great many people, they don't. Rent in a lot of places is already more than half of take-home pay. If that's your situation, splitting what's left into careful percentages isn't a plan. It's a diagnosis. The arithmetic is telling you something real, and it isn't that you need more discipline. When essentials exceed the cap, the lever isn't allocation. It's income, or hours, or skills, or where you live. None of which are as satisfying as a tidy framework, and all of which are the actual answer. And I'd rather be specific than encouraging here, because vague encouragement is what makes this genre useless. If your rent is 70% of what you earn, the honest options are a smaller place, a housemate, a different city, or more income. That's the whole list. None of them is a percentage, none of them is quick, and pretending otherwise wastes your time. There's also a version of this that gets missed. Plenty of people are temporarily under the floor rather than permanently. A training year, a first job, a stretch of caring for someone. If that's you, the structure isn't useless. It's just dormant. Knowing exactly what you do with the first spare $200 a month is worth something, because the moment it exists, you won't spend 3 months deciding. So I'm not going to tell you it's impossible to stay broke if you follow this. That claim isn't true at every income, and you already know it isn't. What is true is narrower and more useful. Structure beats willpower at every income level, and it beats it by more as income rises. If your essentials fit under the ceiling, this works, and it works without you thinking about it. If they don't, the same structure is waiting for the moment they do. And knowing exactly what you do with more money is not nothing. Either way, the point is the same. Decide the shape once. Let the decision keep working while you get on with your life. Thanks for spending this time thinking clearly about money. See you in the next one.